just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. And I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
It began with a man on television begging for help. On August 14th, 2018, Chris Watts stood in front of the cameras outside his quiet suburban home in Frederick, Colorado. His wife Shanann and their two little girls, Bella and Celeste, had vanished. Chris's voice trembled as he pleaded to the public, eyes fixed on the lens. "If somebody has them, please bring them back. I just want them home." He spoke like any desperate husband would. The world watched, feeling his pain, believing every word. He looked calm, respectful, the kind of man who coached his daughter's soccer team and waved at neighbors every morning. His smile was warm. His tone was sincere. But something in that stillness didn't feel right. Behind him, the front door of the Watts home stood half open, the living room spotless, eerily untouched. A baby monitor blinked in the background. Shanann's car sat in the garage. Her phone and purse were still inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, just silence. That night, television anchors replayed the interview again and again. People online praised the husband's composure. Others called it chilling. How could someone be so calm when his entire family was gone? Within days, detectives would realize the truth, that the man the whole nation pitied, the man who cried for help, was the one who no longer needed saving. Because Chris Watts wasn't searching for his family. He was searching for a way to hide what he'd already done. Sometimes, the most terrifying smile is the one that hides a lie too big to tell. Before the headlines, before the search teams and flashing lights, there was a life that looked almost enviable. Frederick, Colorado, a small, sunlit town where the streets curve around quiet cul-de-sacs, and neighbors still wave across freshly mowed lawns. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted safety, family, and a slower rhythm of life. For Shanann and Chris Watts, that was exactly what it seemed to offer. Shanann was 34, bright, driven, endlessly talkative. She worked in health marketing and ran her own social media business from home. Her Facebook page was filled with videos, her laughing, her daughters giggling, Chris smiling shyly in the background. Every clip looked like proof of love. Every post read like gratitude. She often said, "Chris is the best thing that's ever happened to me." Chris, 33, was quiet, steady, polite, the kind of man who seemed allergic to confrontation. He worked in the oil fields, came home for dinner, played with his daughters on the carpet, tucked them in every night. People who met him said he was gentle, reserved, the calm to Shanann's energy. Their daughters, Bella and Celeste, 4 and 3 years old, were pure light. Their laughter filled every corner of that house on Saratoga Trail. Birthdays were pastel balloons and homemade cupcakes. Photos showed a family that felt untouchable, frozen in joy. But behind those moments, subtle cracks were forming. Shanann was pregnant again, hoping another baby might bring them closer. Chris, meanwhile, had grown distant, quieter than usual, glued to his phone. He'd started working out more, dressing differently, smiling less. Shanann noticed. In her messages to a close friend, she confessed, "Something's wrong. He's not the same. I can feel it." To everyone else, they were still the model family, the couple that neighbors pointed to and said, "That's what love looks like." No one knew that inside that perfect house, something cold had already begun to grow. And just days later, the silence would become unbearable because the family that once filled that home with laughter would simply vanish. Monday, August 13th, 2018. The house at 2825 Saratoga Trail was silent when the sun rose over Frederick. Shanann Watts had returned home just after 2 in the morning from a business trip. The Ring doorbell camera caught her stepping inside, suitcase in hand. It was the last time anyone would ever see her alive. By late morning, Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson began to worry. Shanann wasn't answering calls, hadn't shown up to a doctor's appointment. That wasn't like her. She was punctual, meticulous, always online. Nicole drove to the house and knocked. No answer. Shanann's car was in the garage. Her shoes, the ones she wore every day, sat by the door. Her purse, her phone, everything inside. Something was wrong. Nicole called the police. The officer who arrived wore a body camera. That footage, calm, procedural at first, would later become one of the most haunting records of the case. Chris arrived minutes later, looking puzzled but composed. He greeted the officer with a half smile, hands in pockets, polite as ever. He gave permission to enter. The footage shows him walking through the house, calling his wife's name in a voice that sounded more rehearsed than real. "Shanann, Bella, Cheche?" No response. Upstairs, the beds were neatly made, children's blankets folded, no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, just an oppressive stillness that pressed on every wall. The officer noted the small things: a sheet missing from the master bed, a faint, chemical smell near the laundry. Chris's nervous laugh, the way he couldn't stand still. Outside, Nicole told the officer quietly, "Something's off. He's not acting right." That afternoon, local news aired the first reports. Pregnant mother and 2 daughters missing in Frederick. Chris stood on the porch again, this time under the harsh light of the camera, giving his public plea the same clip that would soon go viral across the country. He spoke of love, of worry, of wanting them home, but behind that soft voice was an almost robotic detachment, as if he were reading lines he'd memorized. Detectives began circling the home. They asked to see the neighbor's security footage, and there, on that grainy recording, they saw Chris, hours before his tearful interview, backing his work truck into the garage before dawn. They watched him loading something, heavy and hidden, under the dim yellow light. 3 trips, 3 small shapes. When the footage ended, the neighbor glanced at the officer and whispered, "He's not acting right." Back inside, Chris folded his arms and stared at the TV. His jaw tightened. His voice cracked only once when he said, "I just want them back." By nightfall, the town was covered in missing posters. Volunteers searched parks, fields, and ditches. The sky turned gray and heavy. But inside the police department, a quiet certainty had already settled. They weren't looking for missing persons anymore. They were looking for bodies. At first, the police played along. They let Chris talk. He told the same story again and again. Shanann came home late. They had a normal night. And when he left for work at 5 a.m., the house was fine. He said she might have taken the kids to a friend's place. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. Detectives knew something was wrong. His story had no gaps but no soul either. Real fear stumbles, his did not. The next day they invited him to the station, just to clear things up. He came willingly, in shorts and a t-shirt, calm as ever. The interrogation room was pale gray, the air conditioning hum barely masking the sound of his nervous breathing. The investigator smiled kindly and asked if he'd take a polygraph test, a lie detector. He agreed instantly. "Of course," he said. "I've got nothing to hide." The test began. Electrodes on his fingertips, a strap around his chest, wires running to a monitor. The examiner asked simple, cutting questions. "Do you know where Shanann is? Did you cause her disappearance? Are you lying about the last time you saw your family?" Each answer was soft. No. Each graph line screamed. When the test ended, the examiner left the room. Chris sat alone, tapping his fingers, breathing shallow. Minutes passed. Then the door opened and Detective Tammy Lee walked in. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply said, "Chris, you failed the polygraph." Silence. She leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp. "There's only one truth left, Chris. You need to tell it." For a long time, he said nothing. His face slackened, eyes glassy, lips trembling between words that wouldn't come out. He whispered, "I didn't mean for it to happen." Detectives watched as the walls around his story began to crumble. He said Shanann had strangled the girls after learning about his affair and that he, in a fit of rage, killed her. But when they found the bodies, the truth destroyed even that lie. Shanann was found buried in a shallow grave at an oil site where Chris worked. Nearby, inside 2 crude oil tanks, were Bella and Celeste, his daughters. He had driven them there in the early morning darkness, hours before his tearful plea on television. While the world saw a grieving father, he was covering a grave with dirt and steel. When detectives told him what they'd found, he didn't cry. He simply lowered his head, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm sorry." But his apology fell flat like a sound swallowed by the walls. The mask was gone. The man America had pitied was revealed for what he was: a liar, a killer, and perhaps worst of all, a man who once knew how to love. Outside the interrogation room, one officer turned off the monitor and said quietly, "He never looked scared, just empty." The courtroom was silent when Chris Watts entered. He wore a prison jumpsuit, his wrists chained, his head lowered. The same face that once smiled on television, the face that pleaded for his family's return, now seemed hollow, drained of color. Cameras clicked, but he didn't look up. In the front row sat the Rusek family, Shanann's parents. They clutched each other's hands, staring at the man who had erased their daughter and grandchildren from the world. Shanann's father wept quietly. Her mother stared straight ahead, her face carved in disbelief. The district attorney spoke with no theatrics, only sorrow. Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife Shanann and their daughters, Bella and Celeste. He strangled them with his own hands. He then disposed of their bodies at his work site, an act of cruelty beyond comprehension. The evidence was undeniable. The confession, the GPS data from his truck, the autopsy reports, every line pointed to him. There was no defense left to make. Chris had taken a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, 3 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Chris stood and whispered, "I am sorry." His voice was thin, almost rehearsed. There were no tears. The judge's reply was simple. "I don't think you know what sorry means, Mr. Watts." As the verdict was read, the courtroom filled with quiet sobs. A detective who had worked the case for months said later, "I've seen monsters before, but this was different. He didn't look evil. He looked ordinary." Outside, the world watched. The story of the perfect husband had come to an end not with rage or madness, but with the quiet horror of someone who simply stopped seeing his family as human. When the gavel struck, Shanann's mother closed her eyes. The sound echoed through the room, sharp, final. Justice had spoken, but no one in that courtroom felt any peace. As of 2025, Chris Watts remains in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, confined mostly to solitary. He spends his days reading the Bible, avoiding other inmates who call him the child. No parole, no redemption. Only the silence he created, a silence that stretches far beyond the prison walls. The house on Saratoga Trail still stands quiet, perfectly painted, the grass trimmed, the blinds drawn, but no one calls it home anymore. Neighbors drive past and look away. For them, it's not a house. It's a scar. Inside, the air feels heavy, still carrying the echo of laughter that once filled those walls. Shanann's videos, the ones she posted online, still exist, frozen in time. Her voice bright, her smile wide, her daughter's giggles bubbling in the background. For a moment, if you didn't know what came next, you'd think it was happiness. But that's the cruelty of memory. It never warns you when it's about to turn dark. In the months after the trial, psychologists began dissecting the case of Chris Watts. They called him a family annihilator, a term reserved for those who destroy their entire household, not out of rage, but to erase the life they feel trapped in. He wasn't insane. He wasn't overtly violent. He was ordinary, and that's what terrified everyone. He killed not because he lost control, but because he wanted control. He wanted freedom from a life that had stopped feeding his ego. And so, he rewrote the story by ending it. In prison, Chris told investigators he still sees his daughters in his dreams. "They're running toward me," he said softly, "and I can't hold them." Maybe that's punishment, or maybe it's just the mind replaying the one thing he can't undo. Shanann's family visits her grave often. They bring flowers for the girls, pink for Bella, purple for Celeste. Her mother once said in an interview, "I don't hate him. I just hope he never forgets what he did." The world eventually moved on. But for those who watched the story unfold, one image remains. A man standing on his porch, pleading for help, while knowing his family lay buried miles away. That image became a warning that sometimes the face of evil isn't angry or monstrous. It smiles. It blends in. It looks like love. Because evil doesn't always break down the door. Sometimes it opens it and walks calmly into the light.